It's really lovely to be here. I wrote a story for Salon called Love, Sex and Death, which was basically the story that's now a book. And so that was kind of an unusual story, especially for this kind of group. I'm sure you can appreciate. Salon is a very political magazine, online magazine, and it is the most unusual kind of story for them to have published. And it just turned out that the senior editor there just happened to like it and decided to run it. So there was a very, very mixed response that got incredibly intense from those who believed and those who didn't. And they eventually had to close all the comments on Salon. But I thought it was positive note that at least somebody in such a politically left-leaning magazine was willing to write, to publish this kind of story about the afterlife and the continued existence of the afterlife. And actually, I was very gratified to see that yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the New York Times ran a very long opinion piece on Casadega, Florida, and on mediumship. So it's interesting to see the most sort of, politically focused news and media starting to run what would have been considered as completely out there stories before. Anyway, after I wrote, I eventually sat down and started working on this book. And as Wendy said, I had been a political correspondent. I didn't make movies, but I did do 2 documentaries with Deepak Chopra. I have moved into politics. I was covering politics for the Irish Times. I was out in Iraq covering the war. And when I got back, I was actually writing a book which was part of the peace process in Northern Ireland. It was a cultural outreach project, and I had to go to Virginia to do some research on it. And while I was there, my fiance, we'd only just been engaged 3 weeks prior, had a sudden massive heart attack in New York City. And I just got a phone call to say that he had died. And I stayed in Virginia because I just couldn't basically face coming back to New York, and continued as best I could to finish the book that I had already been sold to this publisher. But while I was in Virginia by myself in this big old creepy house, which was, the person who owns it, I'm sure, won't appreciate me calling it creepy, but it was a very large house. I was there by myself, just me and a cat, and I was basically house sitting it. And all sorts of very strange things started happening. Now, I have to say that at the time, I was a confirmed atheist. I was most definitely a skeptic. I had been brought up Catholic, Roman Catholic in Ireland, and had long since abandoned that religion. The only thing I had really done of anything that was any spiritual inclination I had was to practice Zen, which I practiced for about 10 or 15 years. But the thing about Zen is it's non-theistic. There's no God in Zen. It's not like Tibetan Buddhism. It's not about reincarnation. Really, within Zen, it's the most nihilistic religion probably you can think of, because with Zen, when you die, you just become reabsorbed into the cosmic soup, so to speak. And that had suited me quite well. So when these kind of odd phenomena started happening in Virginia, it took me a long, long time. In fact, actually in the book, it takes a third of the book for me to come around to realizing what was going on. I certainly was not an easy convert. And of course, when weird things like that start happening and you're a skeptic and you have no religious sensibility at all, of course, the first thing that occurred to me was that I have become feeble-minded from this, which was very, very disconcerting, considering I had just been through a war zone and home in one piece, and then I couldn't explain the things that were going on around me. And I can actually read a couple of small scenes of some of those later. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. But it took me quite a long time, and it took me a lot of investigation, I suppose, as a journalist. As these things started happening, I started trying to speak to people, interviewing people, doing some research to try to see if, actually, ironically, it was a Catholic priest who sort of set me off on the path of being open to or even investigating what was actually going on, and that it wasn't some psychological issue of mine, that there was a possibility that this could be a sign, some of the things happening could be a sign from the afterlife. So it was kind of ironic that after me abandoning Catholicism in my youth, it was a Catholic priest who actually helped me get to the point where I I could at least go, all right, well, let me just see if there's anything in this. And I started doing a lot of reading. I was over at the Edgar Cayce Center. I came across the Spiritualist Church in Norfolk. All of these are in the book. And I started doing an inordinate amount of reading. I came across a lovely man, Professor Lou Legrand, who had written a book on signs, Love Lives On, Signs from the Afterlife, and I spoke to him as well. And I started finding in my research, as I'm sure many of you have, you know, you kind of think that if you start talking about these subjects, it's just all sorts of people who are like really out there, you know, entertaining these notions. But it was a completely new world to me to find that some very serious, very credible individuals, some serious scientists, some writers, you know, other journalists, Maurice Barbanel, for instance, had been a journalist, W.G. Stead had been a journalist, even Erwin Schrödinger had, you know, certain, you know, had a sort of a belief in Vedanta philosophy. And I was just absolutely astounded to find the amount of serious work that had gone into this sort of research by an awful lot of very credible and, to me at the time, very unlikely people. And so I actually started really looking into it. But, you know, and as I spoke to Wendy about before, it was one thing to start to investigate it. It was one thing to experience it. And it was one thing to interview other people. It was an entirely other thing to have that sort of penny drop, that sort of epiphany that brought it all together, and to get to the point where it was like, holy, you know, this is actually true. And what I tried to do in the book, what I realized shortly after that was that once that sort of awakening, once that opening and that awakening happened, I realized that it wasn't just my fiance who could communicate with me, it was other people, total strangers, for people I didn't, you know, other strangers. So you can imagine it was 1 year where every single thing that I had taken for granted in life, every thought and belief that I thought I could trust, was just completely upended. And I had to think, I was talking to somebody at BeliefNet the other day about this, and I was like, it was a case of Occam's razor, you know, this idea that, you know, when there are more than one explanations for an event, usually the one that is the simplest is the one that is true. And it eventually became quite apparent that once these phenomena kept happening, and all of these very credible people were weighing in on it, that the simplest explanation for what was going on was that my fiance was trying to communicate with me from the hereafter. And that, for any of you who have experienced it, it's like just this epiphany. There's just no way to go back to the way life was once that moment happens, once that penny finally drops. And so that changed everything. So all of the adventures I had in war zones and jumping out of planes and covering politics and traipsing around the country all came to an end. And my whole focus since then has been on writing about existential issues and metaphysics and spirituality, and also developing innate mediumship ability that I had. And I went to, I know Susan is here as well, spent quite a number of years training back and forth with the Arthur Findlay College to really get the proper training. I mean, part of my reason for that was because as I was navigating this terrain, I came across a lot, unfortunately, a lot of rather unscrupulous people, and quite a lot of misguided people at the same time. And I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about, that I had done the proper training, that I wasn't passing on any superstitions or preconceived notions or any of my issues onto the unsuspecting, because, as you know, a lot of people, the people generally who come to a medium are bereaved. The people who are looking to communicate with their loved ones are bereaved in a very fragile state, as I had been. And so that's really the story of how this all came about. A friend of mine in LA, who's an Oscar winner, sat me down one day in a cafe in the East Village and said, you have to tell this story. And it took me another 6 years after that to get around to writing it. And part of the reason for that is, how do you write that story? You know, it was, do I write it like a journalist, you know, presenting all of the facts, all of the interviews, all of the research that I came across? And or do I just write it as a memoir, like write the experience? And Wendy, and as you all know, Wendy and Victor have done an absolutely phenomenal job of presenting evidence, and quite a lot of people had done work on signs and whatnot. And eventually I decided, you know, if I'm going to try to have people relate and follow the idea of an awakening to this information, then the only way to do it is to put it down as honestly as I can, as the story as it happened. I felt if I wrote it as a memoir, which is quite a difficult thing to do, because to write a memoir, you really have to write yourself, warts and all, you know. So it's really easy to go, I'm just going to write myself, all the nice bits about me. I don't want, you know, and then you realize you just sound like a phony. You really have to fess up to all of the other things too, just to see how these experiences can change us as people. And it was very important for me to sort of show how our characters can arc when we become aware of, when we become enlightened, when we become awakened to this knowledge that consciousness survives death, and awakened to how. So, you know, initially when I realized, oh, it looks like there actually is something to this, and energy does survive, consciousness does survive in some form, it still took me some time to even accept that an individual's consciousness survives, that this is not just sort of energy, nebulous in some sort of way survives, that these are actually individuals. So it was a very, very long and arduous journey, and I thought probably the best way to make this relatable to people and to have them come along on that journey and possibly experience that sort of awakening for themselves was to present my story and let people live it with me as I was going. So I know, Wendy, you've read it. I wrote it so that it sort of reads like you're reading a novel, but it's actually all true. But it was just to try to make it very, very engaging, and to try to bring people into the power of the presence and the present as all of these events and all of these discoveries were unfolding. And, you know, like I said, it's very painful to have to admit a lot of these things to people, but, you know, you can't, you know, that's the challenge of a memoir. If you're going to commit to a memoir, you've got to put it all out there, good and bad, because otherwise you'll lose the reader, because otherwise she's trying to make herself out to be a saint, and no, she's not. You know, nobody's going to buy it. So I was just kind of put it out, you know, the resistance, the sort of the ignorance that I had at the beginning, the anger about death. I mean, that's the other thing when we're grieving, you know, there's so much anger there, and, you know, and just to kind of put it all out there and just let the story unfold pretty much as it unfolded in that first year or so after Johann died. So, I mean, that was really, I think what I really wanted to emphasize also with it in telling my story was not to put the focus so much on what's going on in the afterlife. You know, what's the afterlife like? There's a whole body of work and a whole body of literature that's very much focused on the nature of the afterlife. And I found a lot of it very fascinating. I mean, one of the first reads, one of the first books I read was The Blue Island by W.T. Stead, after he had died on the Titanic. And all of this work was just phenomenal. And there was some lovely work out there that I thought, you know, let me write just from my own experience. And let me not try to go, well, what's the afterlife like? Describe the afterlife to me and tell me what that's all about, because there's a lot out there. What I really felt I could contribute with my story was how an awareness of our continued existence affects our life now, or can affect our life now, how that can change our life. Yeah, I decided to focus really more on what that knowledge and how that knowledge can help us in this life. And we're seeing it really around us a lot at the moment. And I know for those of you in the States, we're seeing an awful lot of antagonism. We're seeing an awful lot of issues around the world. And I know, you know, there's that, a lot of you have probably seen the documentary, which I love, narrated by Gabriel Byrne, an Irishman, called Flight from Death. And it shows you the amount of existential anxiety that we have in life. What the documentary, if you haven't seen it, it's well worth watching. It showed experiments of how working with individuals and seeing them, they could treat somebody with kindness and compassion in a normal state on a normal day. But as soon as the researchers, it instilled in them a fear of death, their behavior started changing. They got very aggressive. There was a lot of antagonism there. And it was really, they were showing that this existential fear, this fear of death we have, for us as humans, just the animal part of us, the human part of us, and it's all about survival, will do anything to survive if threatened. And it can override the spiritual sense. So if we can remove the fear of death, then we have such a capacity then to live with love and compassion with that fear gone. And I felt really that what I could contribute with my story was to show how our lives can change, how we can change how we live in this life with that knowledge, or how that knowledge can change us as people and make us more compassionate, more serving, more interested in others' well-being, kinder people. And it was something that I really wanted to sort of show in that book to the best of my ability. And I think that it's become, and I'm sure we can see in the world around us now, how important and how much need there is for that. And so this was my sort of way of contributing that aspect of my story as best I could to try to contribute to sort of the general well-being. And I know there are a lot of people presenting evidence and doing it very well. There's a lot of people talking about the afterlife, which I find fascinating. There's a lot of people talking about how they became mediums, and all of this literature is needed. What I felt was also needed was how, this understanding of us as eternal beings can help us living our lives right now in the present, because this is eternity. We are already in it. Eternity doesn't start when we die. And so we have the opportunity now to grow and heal and be kind and compassionate. And we can do that so much better when we don't have survival instincts keep kicking in. We don't have fear of death kicking in. When we can eliminate that, I feel we can really become what it's done for me, at least, and what I tried to present in this book was how that instinct can be overcome with our understanding of ourselves as eternal beings and our understandings of our loved ones as eternal beings, knowing that our loved ones continue and that our loved ones continue to walk with us, which is something I found that 1,000 times over now, just working with mediumship and with individuals, the beauty of the continuation of that love. If we are so unconditionally loved by our loved ones on the higher side, by the divine, is it not our duty then, in a way, to share that love where we can while we're here on the planet, even with those who don't believe, with those who are struggling, with those who are still struggling with those survival instincts, and with all of the things that go with it. And so this was really where I thought I could contribute best to the literature on the afterlife, and why I wrote it in the style I wrote it, so that people can kind of come along and hopefully, and bringing people on step by step, perhaps even have their own epiphany just like that one day. And I got a message actually on Facebook this morning from somebody that I knew when I was a kid in Dublin. And she messaged me on Facebook this morning, this big long message saying that she had gone out and bought my book and read my book and had been sitting down with it. I'd set time aside and everybody aside to sit down with it every evening so she could focus on it. And just this morning when she finished it, when she closed it, there's a whole sequence in it about butterflies, which I don't want to give away because it's the end of the first third of the book. But somebody had said to me, oh, maybe Johan will send, this was before the penny had dropped, had said, oh, maybe he'll send you a butterfly. And he was German. And he was very pragmatic and very practical. And I thought the last thing in the world he would do is send a butterfly. And even if he did, I would never recognize him in it. And then there's this sort of funny sequence of these butterflies that really led to an epiphany that's in the book. So when this person, who I honestly haven't seen since I was a child, messaged me on Facebook this morning, and she said she had just finished reading it. Her mother had passed away a couple of years ago. And just as she finished reading her book, a butterfly came and landed beside her. And I thought, oh, it's so, it's lovely to hear that somebody now is actually able to see this and witness this and understand this for themselves. And so this is why I wrote it the way I wrote it, and this is why I tried to convey this. I think there's huge need for people just to write their accounts and how it can change us right now in the eternity that we are already in, and how it can make us better people and better people for others in the planet, because God knows we really need a little more compassion, I think, at the moment. So I'm happy to read also, if you want. I can read an excerpt from those early days. Wendy, shall I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is sort of early on, when I am completely not under this early on the book. You see, it's just the first few pages in, when these kind of strange things started happening. Now, what I will say is, I have come out from covering politics. I've come from the war. I've been a complete atheist for more years than I'd like to admit to. And then this started happening right after he had died. I went to bed that evening with my iPad and scrolled for something on Netflix to distract me from the past. The floorboard creaked. A shiver ran up my spine. I peered into the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, but there was no one there. Later, having watched a few minutes of everything and all of nothing, I drifted off. My iPad must have continued to pour faint flickers of light into the room until the battery died and the world fell to silence, broken only by the burp of a bullfrog, the hoot of an owl, and the heavy breathing of me sleeping. Creak. I jolted awake. The bed frame was groaning under a great weight. My heart raced. Someone had sat on the bed behind me. Someone big. Someone silent. Turn around, I told myself. I couldn't move. Turn around, for F's sake, on 3. 1, 2, 3. I flipped around. No one. I scrambled up, got tangled in the sheet, fell over and whacked my face on the windowsill and bounced back onto the floor. Pain scorched my head. Get up. My hands were shaking. I fumbled with the switch of the gaudy lamp and flipped it on. No one was there. No one could have gotten down the stairs that fast and without a sound. I fumbled on the table for my phone to call 911 and then remembered it was in the kitchen. Shit. I picked up a glass Saratoga spring bottle by the neck and crept down the stairs, peering into the dark, listening for any creak or rustle. No one can move in this house without the floors creaking. Except for the faint chirp of crickets and my own stressed breath, there was silence in every room, in every stairwell, the whole way down to the kitchen, where I found the windows closed and the doors locked. No one could have gotten out. Then again, no one could have gotten in. I slipped out onto the front porch and sat on the steps in a t-shirt and boy shorts, clutching the bottleneck with white knuckles, hearing nothing but the normal sounds of the night. After an hour of sitting out there in the dark, I decided that I'd imagined the whole thing and went back inside. I stood in the hallway for a few minutes, afraid to move, listening, hearing nothing, and no one. This was so stupid. 4 years earlier, I spent the summer crawling around in Iraq as an embedded journalist with the Stryker Division out of Washington and the 210 Mountain Division out of New York, washing with baby wipes and eating MREs to get a worm's eye view of the war. I waded through shit-filled creeks and hunkered down with the guys during rocket attacks in Sadr City. I walked in the footsteps of the soldiers in front of me as we navigated IED terrain. I'd been crammed into Humvees in 120 pounds of body armor in 130-degree heat as we rolled outside the wire to bullets pinging off the metal and the gunner spinning his M2 in every direction. Now, here I was, in rural Virginia, with a bruise on my head from imaginings in the night. Stupid or not, I didn't have the courage to go back upstairs. I wandered into the library, the smallest and most defensible room in the house, and picked out a book called Classic American Decorating. I curled up in the throw blanket on the chaise and flipped mindlessly through the pictures. It was almost dawn before I was calm enough to sleep. As I began to doze, the air around me began to change somehow, growing warmer, or softer maybe. A feather-like sensation brushed my forehead and then both my eyelids like little kisses that felt strangely familiar, but I couldn't remember why. Now there's another scene in between which I won't read, it's a bit long, but I went out the next morning, I got up and went out to this little pond. I saw this little pond out in the garden, and I was sitting there beside the pond, and I could feel these little tugs on my hair, which is something that Johan used to do. I got hair extensions at one point and used to tug them from behind on me all the time. Anyways, this morning, after the night before, I go out to sit at the pond and something starts tugging on my hair, and I'm trying to shake it out, and it kept doing it again. I clambered up from beneath the pine tree. I needed to move. I needed to stop thinking. Every tiny thing sparked a memory of him. I needed to eat something. My stomach was stripped. I shook out my hair to get rid of whatever was stuck there that I couldn't see, and went into the kitchen to forage for snacks. There were slim pickings except for a few oranges in the fridge. I took a couple, shut the door, and swung around to come face to face with a large two-dimensional solid black figure standing in the doorway. I froze. It looked like a black hole I'd seen on TV, with a perfectly crisp edge that delineated its dark, dense form from the event horizon surrounding it. But this wasn't a black hole. It was crudely outlined and had no neck, so that the shoulders and head were fused like a gorilla. But this wasn't a gorilla. It was a tall, broad man, 6 foot, easily, silent and unmoving. And it wasn't just blocking the doorway. It had been lurking behind me while I rummaged in the fridge. It disappeared. Tap, tap, tap. Juice was dripping onto my feet and all over the floor. I'd gripped the oranges so hard I'd punctured the skin. My breath was shallow and my heart was still racing. I scanned the kitchen for an explanation. Billions of times a day, my brain created three-dimensional constructs out of two-dimensional images impinging on my retina. Neurons in my visual cortex made the third dimension appear, but not this time. The kitchen was bright, so it wasn't a trick of the light. I couldn't blame it on peripheral vision, where floaters or fleeting black flashes often appear in tired eyes. This, whatever it was solid, stationary, and full frontal vision, and by no means fleeting. So, some physical phenomena for you, whoever was doing the physical phenomena circle. So this kind of had gone on in the book, and it became over time. I went to a spiritual circle, somebody else saw him, and over time, all of these events compounded to get to the point, as I say, where the only reasonable explanation was the simplest one, and that was that he had survived death, and that all of these communications that were happening was him trying to get my attention.
Yes, I was wondering if you'd had any like telepathic communication with the person. For instance, once I tried going to a funeral a week early, and as I set off in the car, I got lots of voices in my head that wouldn't let me drive more than 100 yards. And I was wondering if you'd had anything like that happen where you've had communication from spirit ever?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I read is from the first 20 pages of the book. I mean, I actually work as a medium now. It became very apparent, as I go on, there are other scenes. After I realized it was him, that just sort of blew everything open. And as the following chapter became about me learning to stop looking outside for all of these things and to actually listen to what was going on inside, either in some sensory perception, either from hearing phrases or from just feeling or from seeing things. And what really happens after this and the whole rest of the book is that I actually started to realize I could receive all of this information from him, from my mother who passed shortly afterwards, and then by degrees started to realize that it really worked. This was the way anybody could communicate with me, for anybody really sitting in front of me. So all of after the realization at the beginning of the book, which is where I read from just now, all of it after that is all internal mediumistic communication that happened either clairvoyantly, clairsentiently, clairaudiently, or telepathically, basically.
Hello, Karen. I have a question. Did you receive signs before your husband died? And I mean signs that you could recognize only later, after he died, he passed away.
No, and I wouldn't have, things that I didn't see. Nothing about him. Actually, the only one thing I can say that seemed odd to me was my first boyfriend actually died 4 months after him. He was my college boyfriend. And I hadn't spoken to him for many, many years. And I woke up one morning. I was actually in Virginia because I was just this was only the week before Johan died. And I woke up one morning with a fright thinking, I have to get hold of Tommy. And I hadn't spoken to him for years. And I tried to call the phone number I had from him. I tried to call his brother, couldn't get hold of him at all. Eventually, his brother called me back and said, oh, he's in Australia, or he was in Australia. He'll be back in a couple of days. And but in the meantime, Johan died, so I completely forgot about trying to reach Tommy. But 6 months later, when I was back in Dublin, I found out that the morning I woke up, thinking I have to reach Tommy for some unknown reason, it turned out that had been the day he had scans done in Singapore. The date was on the scans in Singapore showing that he had intestinal cancer, which he died from 4 months later. That was the only thing in retrospect that seemed odd. But, I mean, I've got to be honest, when I say I was an atheist and a skeptic, I definitely was, and I wouldn't have really, only so that was just so bizarre, and I woke up so abruptly in the middle of the night for no known reason. Anything more subtle than that wouldn't have registered with me at all the way I was at the time. And actually, a friend of mine, when I came back to New York, a friend of mine who was also a friend of Johan's, when I told her some of these things that I had been seeing and experiencing in Virginia, and I explained to her that there's a thing called signs. Now, this was before I started realizing, oh, if I just listen in my head or listen with my heart, I can actually receive these communications internally. She said, that, I was explaining how people see rainbows and feathers and butterflies and stuff. And she said, oh, but he's burning bushes. And I said, what do you mean he's burning bushes? And she said, well, he's going around with these massive big signs, like 2 of them are these signs, supposedly, that I just read, because she's like, if he didn't burn bushes, he'd never get your attention. He would know that. And this is what it took, really. It really was not an easy job for him, I have to be honest.
Okay, thank you, Karen. First of all, thank you, Karen, for this great report of your experience. I'd like you to just go through a little bit of the processes you've been through from your, in practical terms, from the old life to this life-changing, after this life-changing experience you've had. What in practical terms really changed for you in your professional life, in your daily life? Could you please give us a little?
Well, I mean, it's what the book really is about, so as you read it, you see at the end, the complete, actually the thing is, and this was actually kind of unintentional, but they say there's no accidents. I called the first chapter The End, and my publisher, who's also Wendy and Victor's publisher, looked at that and thought it was a typo. No, it's supposed to be the end, the first chapter. And the very last line of the book is, it's beginning, and it just that's just the way it happened. And it was really because it really was the end, and it really became a beginning. So I stopped working as a journalist. I mean, I contribute, I'm a contributor now, and I'll only contribute feature articles on death, dying, the afterlife, spirituality, mediumship, whatever. So that changed completely. I stopped doing politics. There's a whole sequence in the book, also in a couple of chapters, where I had lived over in Brooklyn, and anybody who's from New York knows the size of this city. And I was in Greenpoint, which is right on the waterfront. It was so handy for Manhattan. And it's where he and I had lived together, and years of our life had been there. And even though I became aware, at this point, even though I knew there was an afterlife, I'd been through this whole thing, I'd had this awakening, my mediumship just kind of popped on, and people were just showing up. And, like I said earlier, I was sort of sitting in a park when somebody's mother came to visit a friend for his friend. There's a scene about that, which if there's time I can read. It's kind of funny. What I didn't want to do was get out of Greenpoint. I was like, no, this is where our whole life had been. Everywhere we went together, everything we did together was here. I'm not moving. And my landlord was jacking up the rent, and I can't move, I can't leave. This is our whole life, which kind of didn't make sense because, you know, I was like, why am I hanging on to the past here if he's right here? We're having these, he started, my clairaudience is not great. I'm not very musical. I think musical people have better clairaudience. I'm not particularly musical, so I don't hear, you know, my mother is about the only person who can really communicate with me clairaudient, but I would hear him say things and they'd be in German, which I don't speak. And so I would have to sort of scribble them down phonetically and call a friend of mine in Berlin and say, what does this mean? And so I always knew if I heard something in German, it was him. And so it didn't make a lot of sense to be sort of trying to hold on to the old haunts, excuse the pun, when we should be moving forward and doing something new in life. And I was hanging on to this for dear life until the landlord kept jacking up the rent. And then he actually found a new apartment. I don't want to tell the story because it's a really good story, but he actually found an apartment for me in the Bronx. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You want me to move to the Bronx? There's no way I'm moving to the Bronx, you know? And a whole bunch of things stacked up to the point where it turned out it's in a part of the Bronx, it's just this gorgeous neighborhood surrounded by parks and lakes and everything, you know. He kind of landed me there. He showed it to me on a map. And I was really resisting. I don't want to go up there. I don't want to see it. And it turned out this was this fabulous apartment I got. And, you know, the irony was not only, so my whole old life, where I lived, what I did, everything just changed. And anything that I wasn't willing to change, that I was hanging on to by my fingernails, my fingers were pried off. So I was sent on my way. So everything pretty much, and not only that, but a lot of relationships changed, a lot of friendships changed because, you know, the people I knew were as skeptical as me, academics, journalists, you know, people they had no interest in this. And I was, you know, and what I started finding was people started falling away. And as they started falling away, new people started falling in. And so it was a seismic shift. Everything, absolutely everything changed. And I think also, and you know, my agent even said that when she read it first, there's a radical difference between the person narrating the story in the first chapter and the person, still me, narrating it at the very end. So you could definitely see just the shift in personality there, which I felt was I'd done my job then because I hadn't told somebody, oh, I've changed. I just shown them. I mean, that's the first rule of journalism anyway. It's like show, don't tell. And so that's what I tried to adopt as sort of my writing style throughout it. But pretty much everything changed.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for that account. So much of what you say really sort of parallels my own experience. I'm an academic and a former, you know, utter skeptic. You know, new age thinking is the sort of antithesis of social science, you know, the whole thing, right? And then if I had experiences after my husband's death, which parallel the experiences that you had after your fiance's death. And I have a couple of questions. One of them is, do you know Leslie Kean?
Well, I know of her. I think, I know she's in New York somewhere. I know her.
Yes, she wrote the book Surviving Death.
That's right.
Yes, which is the first book that I read very quickly because another journalist friend of my husband's put me onto it. And she's a journalist who, you know, also is completely, you know, matter of fact, really about her own engagement with this and her own belief system. And so the questions that I have are, when did you also train in trance and physical at Stansted? Or are you more just in the kind of mental medium mode?
Well, I've done trance and I do some trance work and I do particularly trance writing. And physical work, I've sort of dabbled in. You know, the thing about physical mediumship, you really need to sit in a circle, in the same circle consistently.
Yes.
And I've never really had the opportunity to sit consistently in a physical circle, to be honest. I have done some trance work at the college, and I've done some trance work in small group here in Jersey, actually. But I really do enjoy trance, but I've done a little bit of trance communication, but I prefer with trance speaking or trance writing. I prefer it. And even when I'm writing ordinarily, even some parts of this book, I wouldn't try to claim I was in trance with it, but certainly there are some times where I'll just get up and I'll start writing, and it's just flowing and it's just coming, and whatever, I just keep putting it down and it just keeps coming. And I think it's because it feels like almost like a light trance state where it's just sort of let go, just get into that space and let it go and let it flow. And I don't even bother editing, I just write it and I'll go back and look at it later. But I mean, I'm aware I'm writing it, that's why I say light trance. But certainly I can feel the difference between having to sit down like I'm a journalist, having to write a story, just what I'm, and actually just sort of sitting there, and how that just really, I mean, there's some scenes in this that were kind of extras that I added on later, that I literally just sat down one day to write, and the whole thing just flowed and just came out lovely. And I love when that happens, and I do feel it comes from being able to sit for, I mean, automatic writing is physical mediumship, but trance writing is trance. And so I've never had much luck with automatic writing. You just have squiggles, to be honest. Trance writing I've experienced in nice ways, yeah.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for coming and talking to everyone. So I'm continuing my relationship with my partner on the other side. He passed 9 months ago, and getting tons of signs from him. And I'm curious if you've, over time developed kind of a back and forth communication with him. Like you say, can you touch my cheek? And he touches your cheek, or, kind of back and forth, real time dialogue or connection that way.
Yeah, definitely. Although I don't sort of ask him to show me he's there, because I can turn my mind to him and I can feel him there. And it's part of the process that I talk about in the book. There are a couple of chapters where I began to realize first he disappeared when I came back to New York, and I know where all the signs stopped. And what it became apparent to me, and this was how the mediumship sort of kicked in, was that I realized he was trying to get me to listen internally, not look for stuff out there. And I had to learn, and that's a language, learning that the language of the spirit is a language really like anything else, of being able to identify and understand the shift in energy around me, that's him, and that's developed over time, so that now I can feel his mood, I can, and I can, like I say, hear words. But the one thing, and my mother does this as well now, because my mother passed 2 years after him, is that what I have noticed is that, like I said, at one chapter in the book is where I do talk about how I just come back to New York and the signs stop. And by the end of the chapter, I realized, they've stopped out there because he's trying to force me to turn inward. And the only way, because I don't let go easily, the only way to let go of the signs was for him to stop them, which I kind of freaked out about at the time. But then I realized, he's actually communicating in here with thought, mind to mind, with thoughts or sharing feelings, or these like little whispers. Like I said, the word would be in German. And that's when I began to realize, he's communicating with me internally now, So, but what I do know is, I have often said, are you there? And then I'll immediately feel the energy shift, So I think that's sort of what you're asking. I know with my mother, I can ask my mother a question before I've even finished formulating the question in my mind. She's popped the answer in. She interrupts me. She interrupts my thoughts, but that's my mother. That's, how she is. That's sort of part of the reason why I know it. So I know that's you, because she interrupts questions before you even finished asking them, So does that answer your question, Sabrina?
Well, the physical touching, I wasn't really necessarily looking for a sign. I was more like looking for connection and intimacy, because I have a lot of physical sensations from him. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way, or if it develops where you can kind of have more of a real-time physical connection, even though it's not the same as here. But
yeah, well, my entire relationship with him is real time. Like
touch me here, and then they do.
Well, we kind of don't need to do that at this point, I suppose that's, earlier on probably I would have done that, like where I'd say, are you here, or show me you're here, or show me something, and he would do that. It's become a very normal sort of, he died 10 years ago, you got to remember too. So we've really moved, the relationship has really developed into a very easy sort of flow of, I can just talk. I don't have to ask, are you there? Can you do this? Can you do that? Because I just know when I turn my thought to him, my mind to him, he's there to answer or to do whatever. So I would say probably,
It's reassuring.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, I mean, 9 months after he passed, I was still in the middle of what was going on here in this book, you know. So, but now it's a very easy flow. It's just always present. It's the one thing I've come to understand in my work with mediumship is that, you know, there's no time distance. It's all just very present. It's all, you know, thought to thought. We share thoughts. You know, I actually have just been sort of sitting there ruminating in my head, and he's chimed in with an answer. I didn't even realize he was listening. I'm like, you suddenly realize, and this is another thing about growth, is you suddenly realize your thoughts aren't private, you know. And when you realize everybody can hear all the things that you're thinking of, you know, you kind of go, Jesus, you just wouldn't want anybody to hear some of the things you're thinking, right? And then you realize, oh, they can hear it all and they don't judge. I mean, this is another part of realizing how unconditionally we're accepted, you know. But certainly I know, and I know my mother does this too, listens. I'm like, I didn't even know you were there. I didn't even know you were listening until you just chimed in with an answer, you know. So that's what it has become.
Thanks, Karen. Karen Jarvie.
That's all right, Bill Ryan.
And thanks, Karen, for a very interesting talk. I've just got a very similar question. Was there any stage where Spirit or anyone from the other side asked you to write the book, or was it purely from thoughts that developed and from the journalistic side?
The person who asked me to write the book is a friend of mine who's an Oscar winner out in LA. Sat me down in the East Village one day, and when I told her the story, she said, you have to write this story. Now, I will be honest, Johan is an intensely private individual, and I actually had to sort of tell him, I think we need to write this book, and I could feel his resistance to at the beginning. I mean, eventually got written, you know, but I think it was ultimately meant to be written. But it was his nature. You know, we don't change. People don't change. Don't spread wings when we get to the other side. I mean, people continue to be the people we knew, you know, and they continue to learn and grow and heal and everything else, which is why I was saying earlier, is stuff we can still do here because we're all in eternity already, you know. But when it came to, I kind of thought I should probably write this at some point, you know, and I tell other people, I say, that's a really interesting story, you should write it. And like I said, well, I don't know if you heard at the beginning of this talk, I had to make a decision when it came to writing the book. Do I write this as my story, or do I write this as a journalist, presenting my research, presenting their stories, presenting interviews, this sort of thing. And I decided in the end to do it as a memoir because, and I already talked about this, because I thought that as a memoir, I can just present a story and let people just sort of follow along and experience it with me, rather than just, you know, give them more evidence. And like I said, you know, Victor and Wendy have done a fantastic job of presenting evidence. So I thought, let me present the process of the awakening and the experiences and the grief, and, you know, and let people sort of follow on from that. I will say, in terms of whether it was meant to be or not, I had, you know, memoirs are not in the publishing industry flavor of the month at the moment, and my agent was trying to get a couple of publishers to see if they would publish it. When I came across White Crow Books, who published Wendy's book and Trisha Robertson's book, and I knew Trisha, and so I asked my agent to send over the manuscript to White Crow, and he just came back and he read it actually, and he came later on. He said White Crow published some fantastic literature in the area, but he kept saying, I've never done a love story. I was like, well, I was trying to say, it's not really a love story, you know, it really is just sort of presenting presenting the evidence. It's just trying to convince them that he should still do it, you know. And I actually sat in a writers group in New York, a bunch of people I know, and I would read we would read pages of all our different work every week, which is a great way, if any of you are interested in writing, to make sure you stay honest, because a writing group won't let you away with anything. And I actually had coffee one morning at Bryant Park at the public library there with a friend of mine from my writers group, and it was the day after I had tried to convince White Crow it's not really a love story. And I wasn't sure if he would, you know, do a deal with me on it. When I met this friend of mine, and I said, I was telling him this, I've just sent it over to White Crow, I hope he goes for it. He does some great work. And my friend Keith said, oh, that was so funny. his partner is an artist, and somebody had just sent him a photo of a painting that they had done that morning of a white crow. And I thought, oh, that's got to be it. And it was. And they came back and we did a deal and they published it.
My question to you is, we did have a lot, and then all of a sudden they stopped. My husband died 3 years ago, and I never got a single one from him.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that I could do to get these communications back?
Well, I mean, I think the thing about signs, you see, for me, is that they're very personal. Like I say, you know, people say, oh, if you see a butterfly, that can be your loved one. And like I say, with me, I was like, if Johan sent me a butterfly, I'd be like, the last person in the world that would indicate to me is him. You know, what I found with him was that anything that I did see, and this was very early on, anything that I did see was something that was very typical of him, you know, that I would associate with him. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think sometimes when there's a great need, there's a lot of exterior communications, you know. There's a couple of things that could be going on. I mean, one, you might just need to ask him. Have you asked him? Show me something.
No,
Show me you're here. Ask. You know, the thing about you and your husband is you've got a very different relationship. You've got a very intimate relationship there, right, over a long period of time. So the thing is that ask. He's going to communicate like himself. He's going to read you. So I would just ask him to show you something. That and don't predetermine, show me a butterfly, show me a rainbow. Don't do that. Show me something that will make, you know, so I'll know it's you, and then and something that only you will know of your husband, right? And let him do that. The other thing you can do is just and it could very well be that he's maybe, you know, often what happens is that you're busy out there looking for a sign, and what he's actually doing is trying to energetically blend with you, but you're not paying attention here, you're paying attention out there. And so the thing you could try to do too is to develop your own sensitivity, if you wanted to try to do that. And then instead of looking out there for stuff from your husband, ask him to, you know, you can will become more aware of a subtle energy shift when he's nearby, and he could be communicating with you like that. So you could try just increasing your own. There's on my website, if you're interested, there's there's a practice called sitting in the power of the spirit, which I learned from Glenn Edwards, who's a fantastic tutor at the Arthur Findlay College, and it helps us just become very, very centered, expand our energy fields, and connect to the energy of our loved ones. So it's free. You can just go on if you want. I just recorded a 12-minute version of it and just download it or listen to it, and just sit with that for 15 minutes, 12 minutes every day. And just be patient, is what I would suggest.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, Karen. Thank you for coming to talk.
Hi,
I had 2 questions. One of them is, do you connect with your fiance daily, or do you set a certain meditation time to connect with him? Or is that just, since you said...
No, I kind of talked about that earlier. It's like at this point, it's, you know, I just... him, my mother, my father, other people, I just know, you know, it's more like thought-to-thought communication. So I don't set time aside. If I'm sitting in meditation, I'm sitting in meditation for myself, or I'm sitting in meditation for healing, or I'm sitting in meditation to send healing, or I'm sitting I don't sit in meditation, I do what's called sitting in the power. I'm sitting to work with my own guides for my own mediumistic faculty. My relationship with him at this point is more like, I wake up in the morning, I'll probably start talking to him. The morning, that hypnagogic state between sleeping and waking, is a very easy time for our loved ones to communicate with us. So often I'll actually hear from him first at that point in the morning, and then before I get out of bed, I'll have a chat. But to be honest, it's like a running commentary. I get on with my life every so often. You know, it's like the way we were. It's really like the way we were. I'm on with my life. Every so often I'll turn, what do you think? What should we do? Whatever, you know, and just talk to him as we go. So it's very, very fluid and very easy. It's not structured. You know?
And then the second question is that when you do talk to has he ever given you messages about what's going in the afterlife and like how he's evolving over there?
He doesn't, I can see it, I can feel it, I can see him changing just from his behavior, you know. I know people do a lot of out-of-body experiences and get into the afterlife. Some people have done some wonderful work there. I think there is a limit to what can be explained to us because we understand the world in 3 dimensions and we understand physical laws of the universe. And I think it's a little tricky when trying to, I think everything ends up being translated for us so we understand it within a context we understand, you know. So it's not like he'll say, oh, this is what I'm up to, or that's what I'm up to. Sometimes I'll see, you know, his father, you know, I know he's reconciled with his father. I can feel him changing. I've noticed him changing over the last 10 years. I've noticed things that he couldn't or wouldn't have done for whatever his reasons were while he was here, that he's now gotten over whatever his issue is because he's able to do them, you know. So I've seen that gradual change, if that answers your question. But if somebody's up there telling me this is what the afterlife looks like, no, because I think the only way to communicate that is to give us an approximation within a language that we understand. So I'm not necessarily sure, even if you tried to communicate that with me, that it wouldn't be just, you know, what I used to say, and I say in my book, like initially I felt like he was trying to talk to me like I was a 3-year-old, you know, just trying to explain things to me, because our ability to understand something so far beyond our frame of reference, I mean, we just can't, you know. So I know it's a bit vague, but I hope that answers your question.
No, it did. Thank you. Thank you.
What's the website address for that 12-minute audio that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's on my website. So just
I looked at your website and I can't see it. That's why I asked.
Oh, it's on my Mediumship website, KarenFrancesMedium.com.
Yes, that's the one I'm looking at.
Yeah, and if you go to, it's under, I think, free things or something.
Free offerings. There we go.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much.
See, pre-meditations, it's there on that list.
Thank you, Karen. Can you tell us what you are offering at the moment? The courses you're running, I understand you do some courses, some talks, and what regular things you do, or anything that people can get in touch with you about.
Well, I have on my website, on the website you posted to KarenFMcCarthy.com, there is actually a link to my mediumship practice where all my courses and talks and stuff are going on. I think I don't have in front of me, and I'm not prepared to answer the question, but I know that coming up for September and October, I'm teaching a 6-week mediumship mentorship development course. I'm teaching an 8-week course in memoir writing, which these are very, very small groups. I'm only taking like 8 students because they're mentorship, so it's to give people attention. I teach, and I don't know if this is online yet, I teach Edgar Casey trance work, and the course coming up will be doing trance healing, trance writing, and trance speaking. And I'm also doing, what else am I doing? I'm doing a course, a 4-week course with the Inner Spiritual Center in New Jersey. These are all online, obviously, because of COVID. And that's called Heal Your Spirit, Heal Your Life, which is a pretty intense course. I've taught it at the Edgar Casey Center. It's a combination of spiritual healing, cognitive behavioral work, and some Buddhist practices. And it really just kind of helps us all around look at a lot of our distortions and beliefs, and helps us sort of heal really from the inside out. A bit intense, but I think it's worth it. I've been told it's worth it, so hopefully you can come along to that. And I have some more talks, and my website's constantly updating with talks about the book and readings and stuff from the book. There's another one I'm doing with the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre on Tuesday, but that's in the afternoon, Eastern time. They're in Scotland, because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was one of the people I came across when I was trying to find ways to get on board with this new belief system. And I thought, oh heck, if Sir Arthur Conan Doyle can do it, I can do it. So they invited me to speak over there as well, so I'll be doing that. And there's some other radio and press and stuff coming out. And if you want to send me a friend request on Facebook, it's Karen Frances McCarthy, and I usually post stuff that's going on there as well. So,
wow, you're doing amazing things, Karen. And
I do. I have a private practice as well. So I didn't mention, Wendy, of where I do mediumship sittings, obviously, and soul readings and healing. The healing is usually in person, but we can't do that in person at the moment, obviously. But certainly mediumship sittings and the soul readings I'm doing online at the moment. Sorry.
Absolutely wonderful. Would anybody like to thank Karen on our behalf?
Thank you so much, Karen, for this really wonderful presentation. And you've really come out of this background, and it's very evident that you are, it's very evident that you've really been transformed and that you're helping others to achieve transformation as well. And this is beautiful work. It's a work of great compassion. I look forward to reading your book. And thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, I should probably show you the cover, because White Crow did a really nice, I thought.
Beautiful.
Didn't they? With doing the little people with two little love hearts. I think they did a nice job on the design of it. It's cute.
Karen, I want to thank you. What you're doing, because you have an inspiring message and you're helping other people to see what they can have, then you're encouraging them, and then you're helping them to understand how they can do it. And those two components, the inspiring message and showing people how they can do it, are going to make a change for humankind. And you have to keep telling your story, and we have to keep helping others to find your story, because it's inspiring. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that as well. You know, we can just contribute what we can, right? Do the best we can.